Classic Cottage Art and Antiques in Bowling Green, Virginia, and I love to encourage and help people to make beautiful jewelry, paint beautiful furniture, and make beautiful home decor items. So welcome. I'm also a premier retailer for Dixie Belle Paint Company, and so tonight I'm going to give you some tips on working with Dixie Belle paint. Let's find a good color. Dixie Belle paint comes in 3 sizes. It comes in the 8 ounce, a 16 ounce, which is this one, and a 32 ounce, which I don't happen to have right in front of me right now. But it's a really great paint. But some people tell me that with the chalk paints that they they don't like the finish. It's maybe a rough finish. They'd rather have a smooth finish. First off, I have to say, anytime you paint something like this, it's hand painted, so it's going to be imperfect in some cases, unless you spray it on, then you have a more perfect finish. But when you're painting it on, sometimes it could be not quite as smooth as you might think, but there's ways to get around that. First of all, you're going to want to choose the correct brush to use. All mine have been really well loved here. So you can choose a natural bristle brush, which this one is shedding already, or you can choose synthetic brushes. I used to didn't like the synthetic brushes, I don't know why, I just didn't like the ones that I had run into, and I always used a natural bristle brush. Natural bristle will give you a really good finish, but it has a couple of drawbacks for me. Number one, a natural bristle brush tends to shed a whole lot more. See, there goes one right there. Let me see. A natural bristle brush sheds, which can come out in your paint, which I have a couple of pieces that I've just noticed recently that there are some bristles in the paint job. And if I take them out now, it's going to leave a hunk. So I don't want to do that. But I do still use natural bristle brushes. My tongue's getting tied up tonight. If I want something to look really rustic and I really want the brush strokes to show up in there, I'll use a bristle brush. Something that's going to be rustic or farmhouse look, natural bristle's the way I go. But in our classes, we always use these little chip brushes. And honestly, for a long time, that's all I used, and it came out fine. If you use a, whoops, come back here. If you use a synthetic brush, and mine have been well loved, can you tell? They do tend to leave a smoother finish. Your natural bristle brush, this is the Dixie Belle B-E-L-L-E brush, and you can tell it's going to hold a lot more paint. Whoops, turn it go. You can tell it's going to hold a lot more paint. Now that can work for you, and that can work against you as well. More paint is going to do a couple things. It's going to use more product, and it could leave more brush strokes. So, you know, it's kind of up to you. But the synthetic brush, you can tell, is not going to hold as much paint. Okay, so now we know one way to combat brush strokes is to choose the right brush for the right job. Let's see. The next one, let me make sure I haven't forgotten anything. The next thing to do, particularly, I think this might be with any chalk brand paint, is to use your brush damp. And I'm dropping brushes everywhere tonight. But here's my famous, well, not famous, but my favorite little mister bottle. We do have these in the shop now. They're great. But if you saw, I mean, just a little bit of water on my brush, and that's going to combat the brush strokes as well. It's going to give you a smoother finish. So now, the damp brush is going to help you, and that's going to be with a bristle brush or with a synthetic brush. Lately, I tend to use the synthetic brushes more just because I want a smoother finish. The third thing is thin coats. Thin coats of paint are going to have a smoother finish in the end than if you have a big blob of paint here and there. Thin coats of paint will do 3 things. Excuse me. 1, it'll have a smoother finish, like I said. 2, you will have, you will use less product. An 8 ounce of paint, believe it or not, an 8 ounce of paint will go a long way if you use thin coats. There's a Dixie Belle has something out there, and for the retailers anyway, that tells how much this will, an 8 ounce will do. And I know personally I have done a couple of dressers, couple of tables, little tables. I mean, it goes a long way, particularly if you use thin coats and a damp brush. The third thing is, if you use less product, it's going to cost you less money in the long run. So thin coats can do 3 things for you. All right. So the other thing that's going to give you smoother finishes is if you don't overwork the paint. And I'm going to show you a demo here in a minute. But if you go back and forth too many times, it's like with any kind of paint you do. I don't know if you've ever rolled paint on a wall and you keep rolling it and rolling it and rolling it. Well, if you go back over it as it's drying, you're actually pulling paint off of the wall. And sometimes it can lead to, what do they call that, orange peel look. Same can happen with your paint when you're painting with a brush. You can go back and forth so many times that you're actually pulling the paint up, because Dixie Belle paint does dry fairly quickly. So as you're going back and forth too many times, you're pulling the paint off. And so that's going to leave a not so smooth finish as well. So overworking the paint is going to cause a not a smooth finish. The last thing that's going to help you with a smooth finish, and I like my brush, can you tell, is sanding it. About cleaning the furniture, you're only going to have as good of a foundation as you start with in your end product. So we talked about you don't have to go all the way down to bare wood when you talk about preparing your piece of furniture. So I'm not talking about that kind of sanding. I'm talking about after you've painted. I don't always do it because sometimes, honestly, I forget. And if I'm going to do a rustic finish, I don't sand usually, because I kind of want the rustic, rough feel. But this is 320 grit sandpaper, and sometimes I'll use higher, whatever I happen to have. 220, I don't usually go 220, because if you do 220, it can cut down through your finish and back down to your wood, and you don't want to do that if you're too rough with it. But 320, basically what you're doing is you're burnishing the paint. Because you don't, like I said, you don't want to sand through the finish. You just want to, I call it, get rid of the fuzzies. If you've ever painted, particularly on bare wood, the moisture in the paint will actually cause the fibers of the wood to kind of lift. And I think that's what it's doing when you paint with the water-based paints. It's lifting and causing what I call fuzzies. So this kind of knocks down the fuzzies. Now, I'll get back to the sanding in just a minute. Scoot you down here. Aha, there we go. Okay, this is a table I did. I talked about it a few weeks ago. It had a Formica type, not Formica, a laminate type top. And I did a coat of Slick Stick and a coat of Hurricane Gray. So you can see how thin the coat looks. I mean, it looks like a mess right now. But when you're painting with the Dixie Belle paint, this is actually the proper way for your first coat to look. You don't have to have full coverage on your first coat. And I'm going to dust this off. It's been sitting down here in my paint booth for a while. Again, you're going to shake your paint up or stir it. And normally I don't work right out of the jar, but tonight I'm going to. Let me give you another quick tip while I'm thinking about it. Can you see all the gunk on my jar? I'm terrible about cleaning my jar, so this is one of those do as I say, don't do as I do type of things. But if you will put Vaseline around your jar lids, or put like a press and seal or something on there, you will prevent it from sticking, so it won't get stuck when you're trying to open it later on. Alright, so now I'm going to dip my brush in here. I put a little bit of water on it with my spray bottle, and honestly, that's pretty much all I'm going to start with right now. Okay, and oops, and I am just going to paint. Now some of the darker colors do take a little bit more paint, and if you find that your paint brush is dragging like mine is right now, because it's awfully dry down here in my basement, I'm going to take my spray bottle and I'm just going to mist it just a little bit. When you do that, you want to make sure that you don't mist it too much, because you could be diluting the paint and then you'll be diluting the color as well. But you'll see, here we go. And I usually just kind of do it in a hurry, just because I don't want it to start drying. Dixie Belle will start drying fairly quickly on you. And then I go back and I smooth it. I don't know if you can tell on camera, if you can even see what that looks like, but it's a very smooth finish. Now, as opposed to, if I'm gonna do this on a separate piece here, I'm gonna use this chip brush here, and I'm only gonna make a mess too. And I've also got gunk in here, which is not a great example, sorry. But do you see the difference? I don't know if you can or not, but can you see the difference between my smooth finish with my synthetic brush and my not so great smooth finish with the chip brush here, the natural bristle brush? And if I looked really closely, there's probably a couple of brush hairs in there somewhere. But if I want to make that one smooth, I could probably mist it a little bit and smooth it out a little bit more. Dixie Belle does self-level most of the time, but if you put a glob of paint on there, it's going to leave you brush strokes. And this is just one coat on this raw wood, so that's actually not bad. Okay, now let me get to the sanding part, and I'm gonna put my brushes in some water so they don't dry out on me. All right, let me go move you over here to the sanding. So this is the first coat and the second coat I've just applied. Here is the same table. Can you see the difference? Here we go, yeah. This is the same table, well, it's twin with two coats. So you can see how well the coverage is, I hope. I hope that's very obvious. This is coat number one, this is two coats, and you're getting pretty much full coverage. Now what I want to talk to you about is, I'm going to be really quiet, I hope, and I hope this works so you can hear. But this is what it sounds like when it has not been sanded. It sounds kind of rough. Now hopefully, cover your ears if you don't like the sandpaper sound, but when I sand with the 320 grit paper, I am just barely touching it with the sandpaper, and it's going to make these stripes, this look on here, because it's taken a little bit of the paint off. And then I'm going to take my paper towel, and when you put a top coat over this, it's fine. Now, I don't know if you can tell over here, kind of a rough sound here. And I don't know, can you even tell this? All right, can you tell the difference when I rub? I don't know if you can tell the sound here and the sound here. So there's definitely a difference, but this is very smooth now, and it will accept a top coat really, really well. Another thing you can do, if you didn't want to do this with sandpaper, you can actually take brown paper bag and do the burnishing as well. And sometimes I do that on dark colors because it doesn't make these white streaks as bad. But I'll take brown paper bag and it'll burnish it down too. The 320 grit sandpaper actually does a better job, but you can do it with the brown paper bag or the finishing pads that we have at the shop. Pretty much it for tonight. I don't know does it make sense. If you have any questions, just let me know. If you get a chance, stop by the shop. We're at 104 Milford Street in Bowling Green, and we're there Wednesday through Saturday. So thank you so much for watching.